I never expected a Tuesday morning in February to turn my life into a legal battlefield. But standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning, staring at a cease and desist letter taped to my snow plow changed everything. The paper fluttered in the bitter Wisconsin wind, and I could already feel the headache forming behind my eyes as I read the bold letters demanding I immediately stop operating my snow-clearing business from my residential property in the Maplewood Heights subdivision of Green Bay. My name is Jake Davidson, and I have been running Davidson snow removal services for 8 years. What started as a side hustle with an old pickup truck and a plow attachment had grown into a legitimate business with 3 employees, 5 commercial vehicles, and most importantly, a municipal contract with the city of Green Bay that required me to maintain specific routes during winter storms. The city paid me good money to keep designated streets clear, and that contract explicitly stated I needed to have my equipment ready to deploy within 30 minutes of being called, which meant keeping my trucks at my home where I lived. I ripped the letter off my garage door and stormed inside, my boots tracking snow across the mudroom floor. My wife Amanda was already up, pouring coffee in the kitchen while our 2 kids ate breakfast before school. "What is that?" she asked, seeing the anger on my face. "HOA nonsense," I muttered, slapping the paper on the counter. "They are saying I cannot run my business from here anymore." Amanda picked up the letter and read it, her expression shifting from curious to concerned. "They are citing the covenant restrictions about commercial operations." "Jake, can they actually do this?" "I do not know, but they are about to find out what happens when they mess with someone who has a binding municipal contract." I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the letter. The signature at the bottom belonged to Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years ago and immediately made it her personal mission to enforce every tiny rule in the book. The letter stated that multiple residents had complained about the noise of my trucks leaving early in the morning, the sight of commercial vehicles parked in my driveway, and the general disturbance my business caused to the peaceful residential character of the neighborhood. It gave me 72 hours to cease all commercial operations or face fines starting at $200 per day. I had dealt with Patricia before over minor things. She had sent me a nastogram about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall once. She had complained when I repainted my front door a shade of blue she deemed inappropriate. But this was different. This was threatening my livelihood. After dropping the kids at school, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Martin Green had handled the incorporation of my business and reviewed my municipal contracts. He was a sharp guy in his 50s who specialized in business law and had warned me years ago to keep all my paperwork in order. "Jake, come in," Martin said, gesturing to a chair in his office. "You look like you are ready to fight someone." I handed him the letter and explained the situation while he read, his expression growing more serious. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped the paper. "This is interesting," he said. "Do you have your HOA covenants handy?" "In the truck. I will grab them." I retrieved the thick packet of documents I had received when I bought the house 12 years ago, back before I even started the snow removal business. Martin spent 20 minutes flipping through pages, occasionally making notes. "Okay, here is what we are looking at," he finally said. "The covenants do have language prohibiting commercial operations from residential properties. However, there are several problems with them trying to enforce this against you. First, your municipal contract predates Patricia Henderson's tenure as HOA president by 6 years. Second, the city contract specifically requires you to maintain equipment at a location that allows rapid deployment. Third, and most importantly, Wisconsin state law has provisions that protect certain commercial activities that serve a public interest, particularly when they involve government contracts. So they cannot stop me, I asked. They can try, but they will lose. However, it is going to be a fight. Patricia sounds like the type who will dig in rather than back down. Martin was right about that. I spent the rest of that day doing my job, clearing snow from a shopping center parking lot and several of my private clients' driveways. My phone rang constantly with updates from the municipal dispatch about weather conditions. A major storm was forecasted for Thursday night, which meant I would be out all night keeping the city streets clear. That evening, Amanda showed me the neighborhood Facebook group on her phone. Patricia had posted a long message about maintaining property values and respecting community standards. She did not mention me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The comments were mixed. Some people defended me, pointing out that I had been there long before most of them, and that I kept the neighborhood entrance cleared for free during storms. Others sided with Patricia, complaining about noise and claiming commercial vehicles were eyesores. "This is getting ugly," Amanda said softly. "Maybe we should just move the trucks somewhere else, rent a lot, and violate my city contract. Amanda, if I cannot respond within 30 minutes, the city can terminate the agreement and fine me for breach. That contract is worth $80,000 a year guaranteed, plus overtime during heavy winters. We cannot afford to lose that." She nodded, understanding but worried. "Just do not do anything stupid, okay? This Patricia woman seems like the vindictive type." Thursday brought the promised storm. By 6 in the evening, snow was falling heavily, and the city had activated emergency snow routes. I got the call at 8 that night to begin clearing my designated streets, a network of roads in the downtown area, and several residential zones. My crew met me at the house and we headed out in 3 trucks, ready for an all-night shift. The work was hard but familiar. There is something almost meditative about plowing snow at night, just you and the storm and the steady scrape of the blade. By 3 in the morning, we had made good progress, but the snow kept falling. I was on my second pass of Main Street when my phone rang with an unknown number. "This is Jake," I answered. "Mr. Davidson, this is Officer Mike Torres with the Green Bay Police Department. I am at your residence responding to a noise complaint." My stomach dropped. "Officer, I am working my city contract right now. My trucks are not at the house." "I understand that, sir, but the caller reported that your vehicles leave at unreasonable hours and disturb the peace. I am here now and there is no disturbance, but I need to document the call. Can you tell me about your business operations?" I explained everything while pushing snow, the municipal contract, the response time requirement, the whole situation. Officer Torres listened patiently. "Sir, if you have a valid city contract requiring rapid response, that generally supersedes HOA restrictions under state law, especially during declared snow emergencies. I will note that in my report." For what it is worth, the caller seemed more interested in causing you problems than in any actual disturbance. "Your house is quiet." Was the caller Patricia Henderson by any chance? I cannot disclose that information, but I can say the caller was very insistent and threatened to go to my supervisor when I told them there was no violation. That was Patricia, all right. I thanked the officer and continued working, but now I was angry. Calling the police at 3 in the morning over nothing was harassment, plain and simple. By the time my shift ended at 9 on Friday morning, I was exhausted and furious. Martin called me that afternoon. "Jake, I need you to not react to what I am about to tell you." The HOA just filed a complaint in county court seeking an injunction against your business operations. They what? They are asking a judge to immediately prohibit you from operating commercial vehicles from your property, pending a full hearing. This is serious, but we expected it might happen. I have already prepared our response. The hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday because of the expedited nature of their request. Martin, I cannot not work for a week. You do not have to. Keep operating normally. If they get the temporary injunction, which I doubt they will, we will deal with it then. But start documenting everything. Every call out from the city, every service you provide, all your revenue that depends on the current setup. We need to show real harm would result from their demands. That weekend was tense. Patricia posted more messages on the Facebook group, now explicitly naming me and claiming I was running an illegal business that violated neighborhood rules. She organized a petition demanding I relocate my operations, and managed to get 40 signatures from the 200 households in Maplewood Heights. Monday morning brought another letter, this time informing me that the HOA was imposing the daily $200 fine starting immediately. They included an invoice for $600 covering Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I called Martin. They are fining me. Ignore it. Do not pay them a single penny. That is retaliation and it will look terrible in court. Keep that invoice safe, we will need it. Tuesday evening, I attended the monthly HOA board meeting. The meetings were usually sparsely attended, maybe 10 people at most, but this one had at least 50 residents crammed into the community center. Patricia sat at the head table with 4 other board members, looking smug. When the meeting opened with public comments, I stood up. I am Jake Davidson, and I want to address this attack on my business directly. I have operated Davidson snow removal services from my property for 8 years without any issues. I have a municipal contract that requires me to keep my equipment here. I have volunteered to clear our neighborhood entrance during storms for years, saving the HOA thousands in snow removal costs. Now, suddenly, there is a problem. Patricia cut me off. Mr. Davidson, you are in violation of clearly stated covenants that prohibit commercial operations. Your business creates noise, traffic, and lowers property values. The board voted unanimously to enforce these restrictions. Did the board consult with a lawyer about the legality of trying to interfere with a government contract? I asked. We do not need to justify our enforcement to you. The rules exist, and you are breaking them. If you do not comply, the fines will continue to escalate. An older man named George, who lived 2 doors down from me, stood up. Patricia, this is ridiculous. Jake has been a good neighbor and his business does not hurt anyone. I think you are on a power trip. Several people applauded. Patricia's face flushed red. The board has made its decision. If residents disagree, they can vote us out at the next election. This meeting is adjourned. She banged a gavel and started gathering her papers. I left feeling like I had accomplished nothing except making Patricia even more determined to crush me. Wednesday morning arrived cold and clear. I wore my best suit, something I rarely did, and met Martin at the county courthouse. The hallways were busy with people dealing with various legal matters, and I felt out of place among the lawyers and bailiffs. Remember, stay calm, answer questions directly, and let me do most of the talking, Martin instructed as we entered the courtroom. Patricia was already there with a lawyer, a severe-looking woman in an expensive suit. I recognized 2 other HOA board members sitting behind them in the gallery. Judge Ronald Morrison entered and everyone stood. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. Once we were all seated, he reviewed the paperwork briefly. This is a hearing on the plaintiff's request for a temporary injunction. Counsel, Make your arguments brief. We are not litigating the entire case today, just whether immediate action is warranted. Patricia's lawyer, who introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh, stood and launched into her argument. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of contract enforcement. Mr. Davidson purchased property in Maplewood Heights and agreed to abide by the covenants, which clearly prohibit commercial business operations from residential properties. He is running a large-scale commercial enterprise with multiple vehicles and employees, creating noise and disturbance at all hours. The HOA has attempted to resolve this amicably, but Mr. Davidson has refused to comply. We seek an injunction to immediately halt these violations while the court considers the full merits. Martin stood when she finished. Your Honor, the plaintiff's argument ignores several critical facts. First, Mr. Davidson's business exists because of a binding contract with the City of Green Bay that requires him to maintain equipment at a location allowing 30-minute emergency response. Second, this contract serves a vital public safety function, clearing snow from city streets during winter storms. Third, Wisconsin law specifically protects commercial operations that serve governmental functions from private covenant restrictions. The plaintiff is not asking this court to enforce reasonable community rules. They are asking you to override a municipal contract and potentially harm public safety because a few residents do not like looking at snow plows. Judge Morrison held up a hand. Mr. Green, you are arguing the full case. Right now, I only care about immediate harm. Miss Walsh, what immediate harm does your client face if I deny this injunction? Jennifer Walsh stood again. Your Honor, every day Mr. Davidson continues operating, property values decline and residents suffer from the disturbance. Can you quantify that harm? Has a single property actually lost value? Has anyone been unable to sleep or suffered any documentable harm? Walsh hesitated. The harm is ongoing but may be difficult to measure precisely. I see. Mr. Green, what happens if I grant this injunction? Martin did not hesitate. Your Honor, Mr. Davidson will be in breach of his municipal contract within hours. The city requires 30-minute response capability. If he moves his equipment to a remote location, he cannot meet that requirement. He will lose an $80,000 annual contract, and the city will have to scramble to find alternative snow removal services in the middle of winter. Real, immediate, and documentable harm. Judge Morrison made notes and then looked up. I am denying the request for a temporary injunction. This case raises significant legal questions about the interplay between private covenants and public contracts that require full examination. Mr. Davidson may continue operating while we sort this out. I am scheduling a full hearing for 6 weeks from today. Both parties should prepare thorough briefs on the relevant law. We are adjourned. The gavel came down and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Patricia looked furious, whispering urgently to her lawyer. Martin shook my hand. That went about as well as we could hope. But Jake, this is far from over. They will keep pushing. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia escalated her campaign. She filed complaints with the city zoning board, claiming my business violated residential zoning ordinances. That complaint went nowhere because my business was properly licensed, and the city confirmed my operation was permitted under the municipal contract exception. She tried to get the city council to modify my contract to allow me to base my equipment elsewhere. But the city transportation director sent a letter stating that any such modification would reduce service quality and was not under consideration. She even showed up at my house one Saturday morning, accompanied by 2 other board members, to personally serve me with another notice of fine escalation. The daily amount had jumped to $500. "Patricia, you need to leave my property," I said at the door, still in my pajamas because it was 7 in the morning on my day off. "We are here on official HOA business, Mr. Davidson. These fines now total $9,000 and will continue to grow until you comply with the covenants. We can place a lien on your property for unpaid HOA fees. My lawyer says those fines are retaliation and legally unenforceable. You are wasting everyone's time and the HOA's money on legal fees. We have a duty to enforce the rules," she said primly. "If you were willing to work with us instead of fighting, we could find a compromise." "What compromise? You want me to give up my business or move, and neither of those things is happening." One of the board members with her, a younger guy named Todd, spoke up. "Look, man, maybe you could just move your equipment to a storage facility during the off-season. That would address some of the visual concerns. I appreciate you trying to find middle ground, Todd, but that does not solve anything. I need my equipment here during winter, which is when the HOA is complaining about it. And even if I moved everything else, the city contract requires me to keep at least one truck here year-round for emergency calls." Patricia cut in. "Then perhaps you need to decide what is more important, your business or your home." "Why should I have to choose? I was here first, doing this work before you even moved to the neighborhood. You do not get to show up and demand I upend my life because you do not like how my driveway looks." Her expression hardened. "We will see what the judge says at the full hearing. Come on, gentlemen." The three of them walked back to Patricia's luxury SUV and drove off. Amanda had been listening from the kitchen and came out once they left. "This woman is not going to stop, is she?" "No. She has decided this is her crusade, and she is going to fight it to the bitter end." The next 6 weeks crawled by. I kept working, documenting everything as Martin instructed. The city had several significant snow events, and my team performed flawlessly, earning compliments from the transportation director. Martin collected testimonials from city officials, statements from my employees about how the business structure worked, and affidavits from supportive neighbors. Patricia kept the pressure on. The Facebook group became a daily battleground, with her supporters and mine arguing back and forth. She sent multiple letters demanding payment of the accumulating fines, which now totaled over $20,000. She even hired a private investigator to document my comings and goings, which I only discovered when one of my neighbors mentioned seeing a strange car parked on the street taking pictures. The full hearing finally arrived in April. Spring was beginning to show in Green Bay, with patches of grass emerging from the melting snow. Martin had prepared a massive brief arguing our position, and we had a stack of evidence supporting our case. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Patricia had rallied her supporters, and about 20 residents showed up wearing matching T-shirts that said, "Preserve Maplewood Heights." My supporters were there too, including George and several other neighbors, along with 3 of my employees and 2 officials from the city. Judge Morrison entered and we all stood. Once he was seated, he addressed the room. "I have reviewed all the submitted materials and I will hear arguments today, but I want everyone to understand this is a civil matter about contract interpretation and property law. I do not want this devolving into a shouting match about neighborhood drama. Counsel, proceed." Jennifer Walsh presented the HOA's case over the course of 90 minutes. She argued that covenants exist to protect all homeowners, that allowing my business to operate set a dangerous precedent that could lead to other commercial operations, and that I had options for basing my equipment elsewhere, even if they were less convenient. "Your Honor, If we allow Mr. Davidson to ignore these covenants, what is to stop another resident from opening an auto repair shop in their garage or running a trucking company? The covenants exist precisely to prevent residential areas from becoming industrial zones. Mr. Davidson chose to purchase property subject to these restrictions. He cannot now claim they do not apply to him. When Martin stood to present our case, he systematically dismantled Walsh's arguments. Your Honor, opposing counsel's parade of horribles is exactly that, horrible but not relevant. We are not asking you to declare all covenants unenforceable. We are asking you to recognize that Wisconsin law, specifically State Statute 236.293, provides that covenant restrictions cannot prevent activities required by government contract when those activities serve a public interest. The legislature made a policy choice that certain work is more important than private aesthetic preferences. Martin called me to the stand and walked me through my business history, the details of the municipal contract, and the practical impossibility of operating from a remote location while meeting the 30-minute response requirement. Mr. Davidson, what would happen if you moved your equipment to a storage facility 15 minutes away? Martin asked. I would be in breach of contract within the first major snow event, I explained. The city dispatch calls me when storms start, often in the middle of the night. I need to get my crew together, get to the trucks, and get on the road within 30 minutes. If the trucks are not at my house where I am, that is impossible. We have tried to calculate every scenario, and there is no location within the city limits that meets both the HOA's demands and the city's requirements. On cross-examination, Walsh tried to paint me as inflexible and unwilling to compromise. Mr. Davidson, have you actually looked for alternative locations? She asked. Yes. My lawyer and I researched commercial properties. The closest viable space that could house my equipment is a facility 23 minutes from my home under good conditions. During the winter storms when I am needed most, that drive could take 40 minutes or more. Could you not simply move closer to that facility? Why should I have to move from the home I have owned for 12 years to accommodate HOA rules that were never enforced until Patricia Henderson decided to target my business? Objection. Your Honor, non-responsive and inflammatory, Walsh said. Sustained. Mr. Davidson, answer only the questions asked, Judge Morrison instructed. Walsh continued. Is it not true that your business has grown substantially over the years? You started with 1 truck and now have 5 vehicles and 3 employees. That is not a small home-based business anymore. The business has grown, yes, but it is still the same fundamental operation. I clear snow from properties. The municipal contract is what requires me to maintain multiple vehicles and have backup equipment. The city wants reliability, which means redundancy. Walsh tried several more angles but did not land any significant blows. Martin then called Robert Patterson, the Green Bay Transportation Director, to testify about the city's needs and why my current setup was essential. Mr. Patterson, does the city have specific requirements about contractor response times? Martin asked. Yes. For emergency snow removal contracts, we require 30-minute response from notification. This is critical because we need to clear major streets before they become impassable. Mr. Davidson has consistently met this requirement, often responding in under 20 minutes. What would happen if Mr. Davidson's response time increased to an hour or more? We would likely terminate the contract and award it to another vendor. Public safety is the priority. Patricia took the stand for the HOA and spent an hour complaining about the disturbance my business caused. She described early morning noise, the unsightly appearance of commercial trucks in a residential driveway, and the general decline in neighborhood character. Miss Henderson, have you ever actually measured any noise levels or documented specific disturbances? Martin asked on cross-examination. I do not need a measuring device to know that trucks running at 5 in the morning are unacceptably loud, she replied. Have any neighbors besides you actually complained directly to Mr. Davidson about noise? Patricia hesitated. The HOA has received complaints. From how many different households? I do not have the exact number. Martin produced a document. Your Honor, this is a summary of all HOA correspondence regarding Mr. Davidson's business. According to these records, exactly 3 households besides Miss Henderson have complained. That is 3 out of 200 homes. The number of complaints is irrelevant, Patricia said sharply. The rules apply to everyone. Miss Henderson, is it true that you moved into Maplewood Heights only 2 years ago while Mr. Davidson has been there for 12 years? Martin continued. Yes, but that does not mean I do not have standing to enforce the rules. And is it also true that Mr. Davidson's business existed and operated from his property for 6 years before you arrived? Other board members should have addressed it earlier. I am simply correcting their oversight. Or you are attempting to force out a long-established business because you personally do not like it. Objection. Argumentative. Walsh interjected. Withdrawn. No further questions, Your Honor. The hearing lasted 6 hours total. When both sides had presented everything, Judge Morrison announced he would take the matter under advisement and issue a written decision within 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were agonizing. I went about my business, but the uncertainty hung over everything. What would we do if I lost? Moving was not a simple option. Amanda loved our house. The kids were settled in good schools, and we had roots in the community. But if the judge ruled against me, the financial pressure from escalating fines combined with a potential loss of the municipal contract could force exactly that. Martin called on a Tuesday afternoon in early May. Jake, the decision came in. Can you come to my office? Just tell me, Martin, win or lose, we won. Big. Get over here and I will walk you through it. I practically ran to Martin's office. He had the decision printed out, all 17 pages of it, and his grin told me everything I needed to know. Judge Morrison sided with us on every major point, Martin explained. He ruled that Wisconsin law clearly protects your operation, that the municipal contract serves a compelling public interest, that the HOA failed to show any real harm from your business, and that their enforcement was selective and retaliatory. He permanently enjoined them from interfering with your business operations and awarded you attorney fees. Attorney fees? I asked. $73,000. The HOA has to pay our legal costs because their action was found to be in bad faith. Jake, this is a complete victory. I sat back in the chair, feeling relief wash over me. It is really over. They can appeal, but it would be throwing good money after bad. Judge Morrison's decision is thorough and well-reasoned. An appellate court is unlikely to overturn it. I called Amanda from the parking lot, and she actually cried with relief. That evening we took the kids out for a celebratory dinner at their favorite restaurant. For the first time in months, I could enjoy a meal without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The neighborhood reaction was mixed. My supporters were thrilled, and several neighbors came by to congratulate me. Patricia's faction was predictably bitter. The Facebook group exploded with arguments, enough that the moderators eventually locked the thread. Patricia herself went silent for about a week. Then she posted a long message announcing that the HOA board was exploring all options, including an appeal. But it was clear from the tone that she knew she had lost. The next HOA election was scheduled for July, and several residents who supported me decided to run for board positions. George recruited me to run too. "Jake, you should be on that board. You have more invested in this community than Patricia or any of her cronies," he argued. "I do not know, George. I am busy enough with the business. It is 2 meetings a month. And think about this, if you are on the board, they cannot pull this kind of stunt again on you or anyone else." He had a point. I agreed to run, along with George and 2 other neighbors who had opposed Patricia's crusade. The campaign was surprisingly contentious for what should have been a boring local election. Patricia and her allies put up signs and sent mailers painting themselves as defenders of property values. Our slate ran on a platform of common sense enforcement and not wasting HOA funds on frivolous legal battles. When the votes were counted in late July, our entire slate won. Patricia lost her board seat entirely, receiving only 42 votes out of nearly 300 cast. She had become so toxic that even many of her former supporters abandoned her. The first board meeting with the new composition was awkward because Patricia attended as a resident and tried to continue dominating discussions. George, elected as the new president, had to cut her off multiple times. "Patricia, you are no longer on the board. You can speak during public comments but not during board deliberations," he said firmly when she tried to interject during a budget discussion. "This is outrageous. I served this community faithfully and this is how I am treated," she protested. "You cost the HOA over $80,000 in legal fees pursuing a vendetta against a neighbor. That is why residents voted you out," George replied. Patricia stood up, face red with fury, and stormed out of the meeting. She and her husband listed their house for sale the following week and moved out of Maplewood Heights before September. I would be lying if I said I was sad to see her go. With the new board in place, we quickly moved to formalize policies that prevented the kind of harassment I had endured. We created an explicit exception in the covenant enforcement procedures for businesses operating under government contracts. We established a mediation requirement before the HOA could pursue legal action against residents. And we implemented term limits for board members to prevent anyone from entrenching themselves in power. The fall and winter proceeded normally. My business thrived, landing 2 additional commercial clients and renewing the municipal contract for another 3 years with a 15% rate increase. The city transportation director told me they were so satisfied with my performance that they were recommending my service to other municipalities. Amanda joked that I should thank Patricia for the publicity, because the court case and local news coverage had actually raised my profile. Several business owners had told me they hired me specifically because they heard about how I fought to protect my company, and one afternoon in November, I was working in my garage doing maintenance on the trucks when a car pulled up. A middle-aged man got out and approached. "Are you Jake Davidson?" he asked. "That is me." "I am Roger Chen. I live over in the Oakwood subdivision. I run a landscaping business from my home and my HOA just sent me a cease and desist letter. My lawyer told me to talk to you about what happened with your case." I spent an hour sharing my experience and Martin's contact information. Roger faced a similar situation but without the municipal contract angle. Still, Judge Morrison's decision had established precedent that would help his case. "The thing is, these HOAs have gotten out of control," Roger said. "They start out with reasonable rules about lawn care and house paint, and the next thing you know they are trying to dictate every aspect of how you use your property. The key is documentation and being willing to fight. Most people just give in because they do not want the hassle," I told him. "But if you are in the right, You have to stand up for yourself. Roger won his case too, about 6 months later, citing Judge Morrison's decision in my case as persuasive authority. I heard from 2 other small business owners in Green Bay who faced similar HOA challenges and used the precedent to fight back successfully. In some ways, Patricia Henderson's vendetta against me had accomplished the opposite of what she intended. Instead of shutting down my business and driving me out, she had created legal precedent that protected other business owners and weakened HOA authority to engage in arbitrary enforcement. The following summer, the local newspaper ran a feature story about small businesses operating from residential properties and the legal questions surrounding HOA enforcement. The reporter interviewed me, Martin, and several other business owners. Martin was quoted saying that the Davidson case had established important protections for entrepreneurs in Wisconsin. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. My business continued growing, adding a 4th employee and a 6th truck. The kids thrived in school. Amanda started her own online consulting business, working from home, and nobody from the HOA said a word because we had clear rules now about what was and was not allowed. George turned out to be an excellent HOA president, focused on practical matters like maintaining common areas and keeping dues reasonable rather than on petty enforcement of trivial rules. The neighborhood felt more relaxed, less like we were all walking on eggshells waiting for someone to complain about a minor violation. I occasionally wondered what happened to Patricia. Someone mentioned seeing her at a shopping center across town, but I never ran into her directly. Her former house sold quickly to a young family who became friendly neighbors. One December evening, I was plowing the neighborhood entrance after a moderate snowfall, something I still did for free as a gesture of community goodwill. A car stopped and the driver rolled down the window. "Hey, Jake. Just wanted to say thanks for keeping this clear. Makes getting in and out so much easier," the driver called out. "No problem, happy to help," I replied. It was a simple interaction, but it reminded me why I loved what I did. Snow removal was not glamorous work. It meant long nights in freezing weather, aching muscles, and dealing with equipment breakdowns at the worst possible times. But it was also essential work that helped people, that kept the city running, that made a difference. Patricia had seen commercial trucks in a residential driveway and seen blight. She had heard those trucks leaving at dawn and heard noise pollution. She had looked at my business and seen something that needed to be eliminated. But what she never understood was that she was looking at a service that employed people, that supported a family, that fulfilled a vital public function. She never appreciated that communities need people willing to do hard work at difficult hours. She never recognized that flexibility and common sense serve neighborhoods better than rigid rule enforcement. The legal battle had been stressful and expensive, even though I ultimately recovered my attorney fees. There were moments when I wondered if it would have been easier to just give in, to move my business elsewhere and avoid the conflict. But standing my ground had been the right choice, not just for me, but for everyone else who might face similar challenges in the future. Martin framed Judge Morrison's decision and gave me a copy for my office. It hung on the wall behind my desk, a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when the easier path is to surrender. As winter deepened and the snow accumulated, I stayed busy with constant calls for service. The trucks ran almost daily, clearing parking lots and driveways and streets. My crew worked hard and we developed a reputation for reliability and quality that brought steady referrals. The municipal contract remained the backbone of the business, providing guaranteed income and legitimacy. But over time, Private clients grew to represent nearly half our revenue. The business had evolved beyond just plowing snow, adding landscaping and property maintenance services in warmer months. Amanda and I talked sometimes about what we would have done if I had lost the case. Moving would have been devastating, not just financially but emotionally. This was our home, where we had raised our children, where we had built a life. Patricia's attempt to drive us out had threatened all of that over nothing more than her personal preference for pristine driveways without work trucks. The kids grew older, became teenagers with their own lives and interests. My son Jake Jr. started working for me during summers, learning the business. He complained about the early hours and hard work, but I could see him developing a work ethic that would serve him well regardless of what career he ultimately chose. My daughter Emma had no interest in snow removal, but she watched the legal battle closely and decided she wanted to become a lawyer. Martin became her mentor, letting her shadow him one summer and helping her understand what legal practice actually involved beyond what television shows depicted. Years passed, and Maplewood Heights continued evolving. Old neighbors moved out, new families moved in. The community center was renovated. Trees grew taller. Life went on as it does. I stayed on the HOA board for 6 years, helping guide the organization toward being less adversarial and more focused on genuine community benefit. When I finally stepped down, George threw a small party thanking me for my service. "You changed this place, Jake," he said during a toast. "Before you fought back, the HOA was becoming a little dictatorship. Now it is what it should have been all along, neighbors helping neighbors." I appreciated the sentiment, though I did not feel like I had done anything heroic. I had simply refused to let someone else's unreasonable demands destroy what I had built. Davidson Snow Removal Services celebrated its 15th anniversary in business. What had started with a used pickup truck and determination had become a thriving company with 8 employees, 10 trucks, and contracts across Brown County. We were not a huge corporation, but we were successful, stable, and respected. The office wall eventually filled with other framed items beyond Judge Morrison's decision. Commendations from the city for excellent service. Thank you letters from satisfied customers. A photo of the crew from our first year compared to a current photo showing how we had grown. Each item represented a piece of the journey. Looking back, I could see how Patricia Henderson's attack on my business had been a turning point. It forced me to fight for what I had built, to articulate why my work mattered, to stand up against arbitrary authority. The stress had been real, but so was the growth that came from enduring it. I learned that covenants and rules and regulations all have limits, that reasonableness and common sense should prevail over rigid enforcement. I learned that fighting back against bureaucratic overreach sometimes is necessary, even when it would be easier to comply. I learned that communities thrive when people focus on substance over appearance, on genuine problems over manufactured complaints. Most importantly, I learned that home is not just a place, but something you sometimes have to defend. My house at 847 Maple Grove Lane remained headquarters for Davidson Snow Removal Services, trucks parked in the driveway ready to roll at a moment's notice whenever the weather demanded. Patricia Henderson tried to take that away, but she failed. The business thrived, the family prospered, and the neighborhood ultimately benefited from having someone willing to push back against petty tyranny disguised as covenant enforcement. On quiet evenings when snow fell softly and the city was peaceful, I sometimes sat by the window and watched the flakes accumulate. Soon the phone would ring with dispatch calling me to work. I would wake my crew, fire up the trucks, and head out into the storm to clear the streets. This was what I did, who I was, the life I had chosen and built and fought to protect. And every time those truck engines roared to life in my driveway, every time I backed out onto Maple Grove Lane heading toward another night of hard work, I thought about Patricia and her cease and desist letter, and her absolute certainty that she could force me to give up what mattered. She had been wrong. The judge had confirmed it. And now, years later, with perspective and distance, I could even feel a little grateful for the challenge she had presented. Fighting that battle had made me stronger, more confident, more certain of my right to operate my business and live my life without interference from self-appointed guardians of neighborhood aesthetics. The story could have ended differently. If Patricia had won, if the judge had ruled that HOA covenants trumped municipal contracts, if I had been forced to choose between my business and my home, everything would have changed. But that is not what happened. Instead, I was still here, still working, still serving my community, still living in the house I loved. Davidson snow removal services remained a fixture of Maplewood Heights, commercial trucks and all. And the neighborhood continued being a good place to live precisely because common sense had prevailed over rigid rule enforcement. Martin eventually retired from law practice, but we stayed in touch. He considered my case one of his career highlights because it established precedent and protected people beyond just his client. When he held a retirement party, I was invited and gave a toast thanking him for fighting beside me when everything was on the line. "You did not just save my business, you saved my home and helped my family," I told the assembled guests. That is what lawyers should do, protect people from injustice regardless of how petty or bureaucratic it might seem. Martin understood that and fought like hell to make things right. As the business approached 2 decades of operation, I started thinking about succession planning. Jake Jr. was interested in eventually taking over, though he needed more seasoning first. Emma was in law school pursuing her own path. Amanda's consulting business had grown into something substantial. We had built a good life despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them. The obstacles forced us to be stronger, smarter, more resilient. Patricia Henderson never intended to make us better, but that had been the result. Sometimes I drove past her old house and wondered if the new owners knew the history, knew that their home had once belonged to the HOA president who tried to drive out a neighbor over parking commercial trucks in his driveway. Probably not. Probably it was just a house to them, a place to live and raise their kids, part of a neighborhood where such dramas were forgotten as new residents arrived without knowledge of past conflicts. That was fine. The past did not need to be constantly relitigated. What mattered was that justice had been served, that unreasonable demands had been rejected, that someone who tried to abuse authority had been held accountable. The final piece of the story came unexpectedly 5 years after the court decision. I received a letter from Jennifer Walsh, the lawyer who had represented the HOA. She was no longer with her previous firm and had started her own practice focusing on small business law. "Mr. Davidson," the letter read, "I wanted to reach out years after our adversarial relationship ended. I have since left my old firm because I became uncomfortable with how they handled certain cases, including yours. Looking back with perspective, I believe the HOA's action against you was wrong and the firm's decision to pursue it so aggressively was about fees rather than merit. Your municipal contract clearly should have protected you, and I should have advised my client to settle early rather than fighting to the end. I wanted to apologize for my role in putting you and your family through that stress. Your attorney Martin Green fought well for you and I am glad the judge ruled correctly. If you ever need legal services in the future, I would be honored to help. Regards, Jennifer Walsh." I showed the letter to Amanda and Martin. Both were surprised that Walsh had reached out. "That takes courage, admitting you were wrong years after the fact," Martin observed. "Most lawyers would never send such a letter." I wrote back a brief note thanking her for the apology and telling her no hard feelings remained. Life was too short to hold grudges, and she had just been doing her job representing a difficult client. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought landscaping work, summer meant property maintenance, fall required cleanup and preparation, winter delivered snow and ice and endless hours of plowing. The rhythm of work structured my years, provided purpose and income and identity. Jake Davidson, owner of Davidson Snow Removal Services, resident of Maplewood Heights, husband and father and neighbor. Someone who had faced down an HOA determined to destroy his livelihood and had emerged victorious. Someone who had proven that standing up for yourself matters, that fighting against injustice is worthwhile even when the particulars seem small. My story was not unique or especially dramatic in the grand scheme of things. No lives were saved, no great wrongs righted, no historic precedents established. Just a working man protecting his business and home against bureaucratic overreach by a petty tyrant in a subdivision in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But it was my story, and it mattered to me and my family and the employees who depended on the business for their livelihoods. It mattered to the other business owners who cited the precedent to fight their own battles. It mattered to the community that benefited from my services. And maybe that is enough. Maybe most justice happens in small increments, individual cases where someone refuses to back down, where the system works as intended, where David beats Goliath not through strength, but through being right and willing to fight. Patricia Henderson taught me that lesson inadvertently. By attacking my business so aggressively over something so trivial, she forced me to recognize what I had built and articulate why it deserved protection. By refusing any compromise, she ensured the case went all the way to a judicial decision that established clear precedent. By being so unreasonable, she made the judge's decision easy. In the end, she strengthened what she tried to destroy. My business was more secure after the court victory than before. My place in the community was reinforced by the support I received during the conflict. My rights were clarified and protected by Judge Morrison's thorough decision. Years later, after all the drama had faded and Maplewood Heights had moved on to new concerns and different board members, I could look at the whole experience with something approaching appreciation. Not for the stress and worry, but for the clarity and strength that came from enduring it. The truck still sat in my driveway, ready to work. The business still operated from my home, serving the community and fulfilling the municipal contract. The HOA still existed, but with better leadership and more reasonable policies. And every morning when I walked out to start my day, I was reminded that this was mine, earned and fought for and defended successfully against those who would take it away for no good reason. That meant something. That would always mean something. The snow continued falling each winter, and I continued clearing it. That was the job, the calling, the work that defined so much of my life. Patricia Henderson tried to stop me, but she could not, because what I did mattered more than her aesthetic preferences, because public service trumped private petness, because the law recognized reality over rigid rules. My name is Jake Davidson. I run a snow removal service from my home in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I won when it mattered most. That is the story, complete and resolved, a small victory in a complicated world where such victories are never guaranteed, but always worth fighting for.